So, today's agenda, a quick poll question for you all is, how would you rate your customer experience out of 10 at the moment? So drop into the chat out of 10, how would you rate your customer experience? And what's your biggest expense when it comes to customer experience? I'd be interested to get your thoughts and views on if you're a vendor and you work with other people, what do you think typically is people's customer experience like out of 10? What do you think their expenses out of 10? And let's get some interesting stuff flowing through. But while you do that, this is opportunity for welcomes and networking. So if there's somebody on here that you don't know, feel free to drop them a message, ask them a question, get to know them, connect with them on LinkedIn, and let's start spreading the good word and building that community. We've got our guest panelee. That's French for panelist. And that is Gustavo Imhof. And then I'm going to let Gus introduce himself very shortly. And then I've got some questions for Gus and for the wider group, just so we can start getting some stuff flowing around what makes good customer experience and some other interesting questions that could help spark a little bit of debate. And then I'm going to share the next two events that we've got taking us up to Christmas, and we're taking a break for Christmas. But welcome to the Contact Centre Network. And we talk about this, I talk about this religiously, but we center these conversations around customer experience across people, process, leadership, and technology. And we're all here to kind of make the contact center customer experience better. And my mission in life is to change people's perceptions of how contact centers are perceived, so that people see them as awesome places to work, awesome places to ring, awesome places to communicate to. And we do that in loads of different ways. And today we're looking at that through how we use technology, how we kind of look at the strategy that's in customer experience, and how we can avoid falling into some of the pitfalls that cost, technology, and all that stuff can bring. And Gus is going to share some of his pearls of wisdom. So my guest for today, really pleased to have him on board, is Gustavo Imhof. So Gus, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then you can headlong into your presentation for today on how not to bankrupt yourself, or how to go bankrupt with customer experience, depending upon which way you look at it. So Gus, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Very kind for the intro, and thank you all for making the time to listen to me. As Gary said, I am Gus, and I am not a contact center person for all my sins. As you know, no one's perfect, and that's one of my flaws. I'm not someone who operates in contact centers. I always focus more on that insight and strategy piece of things, so looking at it a bit more holistically. And my entire background has very much been around that insight piece. So I spent my career in customer experience. I've done a lot of thought leadership, so I've written in a peer-reviewed journal, so scientific publications. I have a book I co-authored that was published this year, actually. And I've been contributing to several platforms for a number of years now. And my entire career has always been in voice of the customer programs. So I run large European programs for large companies, either as a consultant or internally. I eventually decided to go to the dark side and go actually in-house. And I led the customer experience for Hermes, the parcels, not the handbags, unfortunately, for many people who asked me discounts over the years, and Lowell debt collection. So very, very different industries, but very enjoyable. And now I work with Avado, which is a corporate trading provider, and I am essentially their lead for everything that's market research and customer experience insights. And that's a bit about me. Now, the reason Gary asked me to contribute is, as he mentioned in one of his communications, I tend to be a bit tongue-in-cheek in how I create my content and how I go about telling my stories. And that's something that's just about how I operate. And that's very much the tone I'm taking in that presentation, is instead of thinking all the way to save money and so on, is actually what are different ways you can actually go bankrupt in how you go about your customer experience. Now, I always like to kind of bring it back a bit and set the scene by remembering and thinking about what is actually the role of CX in business. Because if you think about it, right, the goal is incredibly noble, right? Is you want to make sure that people have amazing experiences, they enjoy their time with the organizations, there's no grief, great experiences, great word of mouth. It's all about creating value, right? It's about creating value for the customers, which is such a positive message to have. But we tend to get a bit carried away with that romantic view of wanting every customer to be happy, right? And yes, it's brilliant, but there are some limits. And it's first and foremost, yes, is a balancing act. Because on the one hand, you want to create those amazing experiences, right? We as customers want to have those amazing experiences, to be swooped off our feet and really enjoy and become undying fans of a brand. That's what we want as customers. That's what we want to give to other people. It's in our nature. The human nature is about creating value for other people. That's what we're hardwired to do. But on the other hand, the organization actually needs to generate enough revenue to make that viable, to cover the costs, right? You can't just create amazing stories, but not be able to pay for it. Because that's the thing, you end up having a horde of loyal fans who don't have a company to service them because the company went bankrupt, because it just went above and beyond to such an extent that it just doesn't make sense. So it's a balancing act. You want to create great experiences, but it still needs to make sense financially. And that's one thing I often say that gets people to hate a bit on me, and I'm fine with it, is that the customer isn't the most important stakeholder that you have. It's not, right? Ultimately, if you don't have a shareholder, if you don't have shareholders, owners, whatever it is, but if no one puts the money in, you don't have a business. You have that as an enabler. The customer is just your best path to getting and generating more value for the shareholders, right? But the math needs to make sense at the end. And many people always fight that back and say, look, businesses, they're just there to create happy customer. They're there to create happy customers, to generate that goodwill, etc. Maybe they are. Maybe that's the mission, the vision of an organization. But the math needs to work out. And as I said, right, what's the point of having loads of diehard loyal fans if you go bankrupt because of how good you've been and you cannot even afford to pay your customers, your suppliers? Is that cutting edge customer experience? Is that best practice? Because if you were, I mean, it's quite simple, right? Let's just create a 5-star hotel. Let's not charge anyone who goes in there. Just give free rooms with all the butlering service and so on, and you get a 10 on your NPS. Easy, right? It's incredibly easy to create a great customer experience. It's incredibly hard to create one that actually doesn't get you bankrupt. That's the key message. And I love this quote from James Collins, and that's what that resonates a lot with me, surprisingly, as a CX person. And it kind of says, look, profit for business is like oxygen, food, water, and blood for the body, right? We cannot live without oxygen, food, or water. That's just not possible. They're not the point of life, but there is no life without them. And that's the same thing for profit. Profit isn't the point of business. It's not the reason the business exists, although you could argue to many businesses it is, but it's something you cannot live without. I cannot live without oxygen coming into my body, but I'm not living to breathe. Very much like so, a business doesn't live for the profit to come in, but without the profit, it starves and dies out. And that's that balancing out that I always make sure to put an emphasis on, because that's where that hemorrhaging money comes in. And today I want to share with you 4, not 5, like the previous slide said, 4 ways that you can go bankrupt with your customer experience. And a lot of it is us wanting to do the right thing, right? We want to do the right thing by the customer, by the business, but we may be slightly misguided at some points. And those are 4 elements that kind of resonate a lot more with people. And the first one is exceeding customers' expectations. Like, how often have you heard, oh, we want to delight our customers, we want to exceed their expectations? I see it in so many job advertising for contact center agents. It's just all over the place. And as a customer, obviously we want, right? We want to get that amazing experience that you didn't see coming, you didn't expect. You have that massive discount or those perks or whatever it is. And you want to be able to tell those stories on how that business made us feel special, like that business made us feel different. And that's powerful. That's really powerful. Doesn't necessarily means it's a good idea, because not everything can delight customers. And there's two key theories I want to talk through today. The first one is the Herzberg motivation theory that says, and that one is really focused on organizational design and employee, but it's one that really resonates because ultimately about the human aspect, right? And you have two types of factors that are going to play in your assessment of a brand. Those are the hygiene factors and the motivating factors, right? And essentially what we say is hygiene factors are elements that are not going to satisfy anyone, but if they're missing, you'll feel it. So let's imagine very, very tangible. You're going to a really, really fancy restaurant, right? You're celebrating your anniversary, you're proposing whatever it is. You have a really, really nice dinner planned ahead. And you just go a quick drop to the loo just to get ready. And this is the dirtiest bathroom you've seen in your entire life. Like it stinks and you cannot even bear being inside that bathroom. But it's a 5-star restaurant, right? It's a Michelin star restaurant. So how do you reconcile that? You can't, right? Even if the food is out of this world, what you're going to remember is those toilets. They were so disgusting. What is it that you're going to tell all your friends? Like, yeah, the food was brilliant, but those toilets, they were horrendous. So no matter how good the food is, if the toilet aren't up to scratch, if they're not even usable, you're not going to delight that customer, right? You're going to get it really badly. And there's many things like that that would be a hygiene factor. I mean, I use actual hygiene as an example, but it could be about, I am a banking provider, but it's impossible to make a bank deposit to someone else. Or you cannot get a check paid in because you don't have a local bank, right? Those can be very, very tangible things. No one's going to be delighted they can deposit a check, but it's something that's going to be important. And then you have the motivating factor, which is what everyone tends to focus on when they talk about exceeding expectations. But that is a gift, the surprise, the upgrades, whatever it is. Those are the things that really resonate with people, that create those goodwill stories. But there's no point in throwing all that money to those factors if the basics aren't right, right? That's the key thing. Is I always say is basics is sexy now, right? The basics are sexy. You need to get the basics right before you try to delay it. Don't crawl, well, don't walk before you can crawl, is the sentence that often comes back. Now, this is a very black and white theory, and I like to bring one by Oliver that kind of looks at the relationship between needs and satisfaction. And essentially, they kind of break it down. Oliver breaks it down into 3 categories, right? You have some things that are malevolent dissatisfier. So if they're there, you don't care. If they're missing, you're going to be really annoyed. You have malevolent satisfier, which is you don't expect it, but if it happens, that's brilliant, right? That's something really good. And that could be a friendly chat with the waiting staff at the restaurant, for example. And then you have the ambivalent satisfier, which is depending how well it is, it can delight or upset you. That's typically the core of the service, is how well a service is delivered, is does the technology work, doesn't, and that's everything in that. So it's kind of giving us a bit more of a 3D view of factors as part of our experience. And it's really good to have that lens to really think, okay, so I have that existing journey in my contact center, and my IVR that's working this way or that way. In which category does each of the elements of my experience fit in, and how am I delivering in that? Right? So for example, is an IVR something that can only detract, that can only upset people? Probably not, right? Is we have that expectation is going to be a burden to go through, but I've seen IVRs that are essentially voice bots that answer the question before you need to talk to someone. That if he gets it right, that's brilliant. I'm delighted. I'm happy. That becomes a satisfier to me. But it's really important to really keep in mind that before you try to exceed people's expectations, you want to make sure you get the basics right. Now, the key thing though is exceeding expectations. What does that mean? Is essentially customers come in expecting something, you over deliver. Now, there's something that may happen. It's not an automatic consequence, but one thing that may happen once you over-deliver is that you're teaching your customer to expect more. You're teaching your customer to expect the excess delivery, right? That's the thing. If you go to your local Subway, and that's a silly example, right? But if you go to your local Subway and every time you went, or you went 2 or 3 times, and every time they gave you an upgrade for free, or they give you a free cookie on top of the order, the 4th time you're going to expect it. And if you don't get the free cookie, if you don't get the free upgrade, you're going to be disappointed. Now, they're doing more than they promised they would, but the expectation they set for you is higher. And that's a problem when you talk about exceeding expectations. You're talking about exceeding a moving target, and the target that moves on the back of your interactions. So the expectation is very low at the first level. You exceed it, that becomes the new expectation. Now, you may want to say, okay, I want to exceed expectations, so I'm going to do even more at that second stage. Again, you may increase expectation. At a point, you reach a level that's so high, you can't even physically exceed it without hiring the entire Cirque du Soleil to come and perform in your local coffee shop. That's as simple as that, right? Is you can't get there. And that's a problem. Now, the big challenge is if you can actually make it financially viable, that's perfect. Go ahead and do it. But the reality is the cost to exceed that expectation, more often than not, is far going to outweigh the added value that you get. And because that's the thing, if you get a tenner in terms of costs to exceed the expectation of your customer, but that customer is going to bring you 10 new customers, it may work out, right? But if you pay money and you don't get anything in return, you're at a deficit. You just eroded your margin, and you're essentially borrowing that money from somewhere in the business, right? You're borrowing that generosity from somewhere else in the business. And the more you exceed that expectation, the more expensive you get, and the lower the return you get. And ultimately, the numbers don't add up. And that's what I was saying at first, is it's brilliant to have diehard fans, but if you have to close the doors, is that a great experience? And that's really the key thing is, let's stay away from exceeding expectations. Let's really focus on doing what we do really well. Let's focus on getting the hygiene factors taken care of. Let's focus on building great experiences, but let's not work with a moving target. Let's not try to exceed expectations, because it's bound to fail. It's a really, really good motivational line, or we want to exceed customers' expectations, but it's not a strategy. It's a tactical fix here and there. It's a great way to recover a terrible experience if we want, but it's not a strategy. And that's a key thing. Don't see it as a strategy, see it as a tactical fix when things went wrong. That, yes, do. Probably a good choice to do. The second is, and if we have any vendors in the room, I truly, truly, truly apologize. But the second way for you to go bankrupt is what I call the magpie syndrome. And I think Gary mentioned it a few times as a shiny object. Same thing, but is kind of try to go to the technology first. You see that amazing chatbot or voice IVR and say, oh my God, that's amazing. I really need that. I really, really, really need that. And you don't actually stop to think, what is the problem that it's trying to solve? Now, I've seen it a few times. What happens is you fall in love with a technology and you try to shoehorn it into a problem that you may or may not have. And you do everything you can to fit it in. The reality is that you end up spending more than you need to, and you may not even solve the problem at all or in a suitable way. Right? There's no point in having a gun to kill a mosquito. That's essentially what we're talking about. A gun can do a lot more than kill a mosquito, but I mean, a rolled up magazine does just as well. So the key thing is always make sure that you focus on your goal and how to get there, right? And as I have on the screen, right, is if I want a picture on the wall, I need to figure out what picture, what wall, where on that wall, why do I want it, etc. But once I know what I want to do, I need to decide the tool. Now, if I fell in love with a screwdriver, I can probably hammer using the back of a screwdriver, a painting or a picture, but that's going to take a lot more work. So it's always that thing of think of what is the problem that you have. What is the process? Can you redesign the process? Does it need technology? And if it does, rethink what is the technology you need. Don't over-engineer it, right? You don't need a complex marketing automation with AI process if you don't even have an email list, right? You don't need a voice bot if you don't know how to use your IVR. And that's all those things, right? Is walk before you control, think of the challenges at the right level, don't fall in love with technology because you're guaranteed to spend more than you have, and you're guaranteed not to have as much an ROI as you could have done otherwise. Then the one that's particularly close to my heart, because that's my bread and butter, is measuring the wrong things. Now, if you take a plane, if you're to fly a plane, and we're just 1 degree off course, and let's say you're traveling, right, to San Francisco to LA, not LA, to New York, right? If you are just 1 degree off course, that 1 degree can be the difference between landing where you are and landing in a completely different country, right? So you may depart from San Francisco hoping to land in New York, and you actually find yourself somewhere in Canada, just for 1 degree. Now, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but what I say is, make sure you understand your customer experience metrics align with your goal as a mission as a company, right? Many people are just going to default say, oh, I want to measure NPS because everyone says you should measure NPS. That's what the board's like, and therefore we have to do it. Fine. Now, if I think in my past life, right, Lawo is that collection. No one wants to be a customer from Lawo. Because if you become a customer, it means you have debt that you owe the company. That company was so tired of chasing you that they sold the debt to someone else. No one in their right mind is going to recommend you to become the customer of a debt collection agency, right? I spent a year or so there, and not a single verbatim feedback I've read kind of said, oh, you know, I heard from one of my mates about you and I loved the experience so much that I decided to default on my payment with Vodafone and cross my fingers so that Lao could buy it and I could become your customer. Said no one ever, right? So NPS is not a relevant metric for Lao. Effort, on the other side, trust, confidence would be. So it's really think, what is your North Star as a business? What is it that you want to be known for? Do you want to be the most loved? Do you want to be the most recommended, the most efficient, the most seamless? Whatever it is, go for that. But as a utilities company, I don't want to be the most loved. I want to be the most efficient, right? As a debt collection, I just want to make sure people engage with me and they trust me. No one's going to recommend. But if you measure the wrong things, you're going to go in the right direction. Simple as that. You're going to go the wrong direction. Because if we were to use NPS, I mean, typically they say, oh, I'd recommend if you wiped up my debt, if you said, I don't need to pay it off. That's not going to give us much value. And no one is going to recommend it. Simple as that. So make sure that you measure the right thing at the right moment. Otherwise, you're going to fall off course and land somewhere, but definitely not where you want to be. And finally, focusing on seamless experiences. Because we have that belief somehow and a lot of noise in the market that says, oh, you need to make it easy. Customers want easy experiences. They want it to be able to make it in a few clicks or a few experiences or whatever. A lot of the time, yes, a lot of the time people want to get in, get out, and that's it. They want a seamless and smooth transaction, but not everywhere, right? Not everywhere. If you have a premium service that you offer to your most valuable customers, they want the fuss, right? If you're going to say a jewelry store or a watch store and you're going to buy a 20,000 pounds watch, do you really want to just go to the counter, select the watch and pay? No, you want them to make all the fuss about you. You want them to take you to the table, to offer you some coffee, to ask about yourself, to show you some watches, tell you about the story of it. And all that is friction, but it's part of the experience, right? No one in their right mind, unless they're incredibly, incredibly wealthy, no one in their right mind will spend 20,000 pounds on a watch if they don't have the fuss around it. They want that experience to feel seen, to feel valued, to feel like they accomplished it. And that's not something you're going to accomplish with a seamless experience. And if we were to take that easy experience out of the way as well, you could think, oh, a massage, right? You're sending a massage and you're trying to get it done as soon as possible. It's quick, it's seamless. That's not what people are paying for. So we have that obsession with making things seamless, but you want it to be worthwhile. You want to make sure that friction exists where it makes sense, right? You want friction to exist where it makes sense. And typically, from a contact center perspective, the most obvious one I can think of is necessary friction is when you do the identity check, right? You verify you're talking to the right person. Now, let's imagine you're talking to your pension provider or your bank, and they say, oh, Gary, it's so good to see you. How much money do you want to take out of your bank account? Without asking what Gary's last name is, his date of birth, his address, or anything. Say, oh, you say you're Gary? Oh, of course. Yes, Gary. How much do you want to withdraw? That's not something that would infuse confidence, would it? Like, you can have someone impersonating you. Now, from that perspective, imagine how valuable it is for the customer to have that check done. Because yes, it's friction, but at least it gives me confidence that unless that person knows everything they need to know about me, they're not going to be able to access my account. Now, we're probably doing it because the regulator tell us to do so. But if you think about it, it's a brilliant way to go about it for the experience. The same example would be an airline, right? I know that traveling hasn't been on top of everyone's agenda lately, but hopefully we're getting closer and closer to that. I know for a fact that if I walked into an airplane and as we're about to depart, they don't do the usual safety procedure about the mask and the exit and so on, I'll be freaking out all flights. I'll be thinking those guys are not prepared to help me. They're not prepared to take care of things should things go wrong. Now, the odds of something going wrong are incredibly small. But yet, just because that message would be missing, I'd be second guessing it and I'll have the most exhausting flight I have, simply because I'll be, in my mind, I'll be thinking, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, they're not ready, they're not ready, they're not ready. And Murphy's Law means that when you're not ready, stuff happens. So that's really the key thing is, I'd like to challenge you guys to think away from the experience has to be seamless to the experience has to be right. In the shoes of your customers, would seamless make sense every time? It wouldn't. And sometimes friction is positive. Friction adds value to you, adds value to the customer, and adds value to the relationship. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the fourth tip that I had. Now, if you do think that my ramblings aren't completely nonsense, in which case I pity your poor judgments. But in case I'm not complete nonsense, you can read my chapter in Customer Experience 3, which is all about the power of memories and how memories are a better target for us to work towards rather than customer experiences. Yet another of my more inflammatory thoughts. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Gustavo Imhof, or you can get in touch at gustavo@salesAhead.com. I tend to be quick-ish with emails when I'm outside of work hours. But for now, thank you very much for making the time. Thank you again, Gary, for the opportunity to speak to this group. And I'll be welcoming any thoughts, threats, questions, or even compliments if you have, which is rare, but I'll take them. Over to you, Gary.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Gus. I'll let you stop sharing your screen and we'll move into some of the Q&A. And I thought some very contentious points made in some of the thoughts there. I think for me, there was some really interesting stuff. I think from I think a lot of people said it is like removing friction from the process and adding friction in at the right point needs to be the order of the day. I think Oliver said some really good stuff there in terms of not every transaction needs to be seamless, but has to be low effort for the customer. So I think there might be one or two questions around some of the points that you've made. So I'm going to let people think and percolate on some questions. But before we do that, I've got probably one or two questions for you. And I'm thinking, which is the best one based on one of the things you talked about. I'm going to ask you that question. Is so you've talked a lot about how not to go bankrupt or how to go bankrupt with customer experience. And I think when we look at how much we invest in tech, when we look at how much we can invest in resource, where do you kind of see the tipping point or the diminishing returns on CX investment?
I think I see it in the majority of programs where people are trying to create innovation before seeing if their house is in order, right? So I'll take a tangible example, and I won't name names, but I know of a parcels delivery company that I may or may not have worked with, and I will leave that unclear, that focus a lot of their time on building a beautiful, beautiful website, right? The website was top notch. They went over budget, they did everything, and they created really, really cool website and app. Couriers were still throwing parcels over the roof. Couriers were still misreporting where they left the parcel. That's a proverbial lipstick on a pig, right? And that's what I was saying is make sure you have the hygiene factors right. So in the case of parcel, you want your parcel delivered undamaged, and that if they're not delivering to your hands, that the report of where it was left is accurate. That's it. Those are the basics. Until you get those done, nothing else matters. So I think that the tipping point and the challenge of diminishing returns is when you start forgetting what the basics are, when you start forgetting to get your house in order before trying to exceed those expectations or to create better. Get what you have now right, and then look at better.
And I think there's you made some interesting points around first impressions of customers and customer expectations versus profits. And actually, how do you start to exceed customer expectations? Now, I think as contact center professionals, we're always trying to exceed customer expectations as much as you can. And I think what was interesting, the point that I did take from it is to say, actually, if you consistently exceed customer expectations, that expectation then becomes the normal. So you have to go even further to exceed those customer expectations, which I get. It feels and it sits at odds with me at the same time to say that don't try and exceed customer expectations. So exploring that, where would you see that tipping point of trying to exceed customer expectation versus not doing too much that it becomes a normal everyday service in occurrence?
So I think that we're incredibly lucky in a way that experiences all over the UK are pretty bad, right? Most customer experiences, when you call a contact center or you go to a store or you go on a website, are pretty bad. I think there's no denying it. Now, this is brilliant, right? Because expectations are created from lived experiences, from what to expect is literally what am I likely to receive as a treatment? The fact that most experiences are bad means that we have an opportunity by just doing things well to exceed those expectations, right? Just by being good in our operation, having great agents and being able to have great conversations, that in itself, in a lot of the cases, is great expectations, great exceeding expectations. Same thing with having agents on staff, right? Is if I'm told it's going to take half an hour of hold before I get to someone, that's going to really annoy me, especially if the music is horrendous. Now, if you answer slightly earlier than everyone else does, that's brilliant. And that's, if you think about it, that's how First Direct got their name out there, is that they made a promise that you won't be 10 minutes on hold. People would answer within a few rings. That's what made their offering so powerful when they started. So a lot of the time, exceeding expectations is just rising above average and becoming really good at what you do. When it becomes problematic is when you invest a lot more to have free gifts or discounts or whatever.
Brilliant. I'm gonna come to Oliver in a minute because I can see the cogs whirring in Oliver's head. You definitely got something to say, Oliver. But before we do that, Gustavo, I'm gonna ask David. David's asked a question in the chat there. at what stage should you look to outsource your customer experience so you can concentrate on your core business? And obviously, Karen is saying straight away, especially if it's your live chat, but what's your view on outsourcing customer experience? Because for me, I think outsourcing that can sometimes create some sort of dissonance to the delivery of that CX. So where's the balance there on what you outsource and how much you outsource?
Yeah, so I'll let Karen have most of the spotlight on that one. But if I just do in a couple of sentences, ultimately, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But as you said, you have that risk, right? Is many BPOs have one agent working on 3 different brands, right? And no matter how good you are, I really don't care how good you are, no one's going to convince me that you can be one agent working on Microsoft, Victoria's Secret, and Laos at the same time. You just can't, right? And even if you do 3 competitors, you're going to get the messaging mixed up and so on. So I think that's often a big pitfall that you get. For me, as long as those person really bought into the vision of the brand and you're actually properly investing in them, that's great. Because you all hear about those call centers in India where people aren't good. Now, I work for an Indian company. People in India are brilliant. They're brilliant. It's not that they're cheaper because obviously the microeconomics makes it so, but it's not necessarily that you outsource to India means it's terrible experience. Is they outsource to India and they take it as an opportunity not to invest in people and use that as a burden. But you can have probably world-class teams based out of India, outsourced or insourced, but offshoring is a decent option if you invest properly in them. And that's where it often happens, isn't it?
Karen, as an outsourcer in the live chat world, how do you overcome some of that challenge that Gus has said there about maintaining brand integrity and maintaining customer experience for those different brands by managing multiple brands? How do you manage that?
Well, I think firstly as well, I'm UK based, Gustavo. So I guess I sort of, and my clients are UK based, although one is global. And I think for me, I think it's just understanding your customer service and understanding your clients and what their expectations is. And I think if you get that right, and that's my background, and that's what my team, that's what we spend our time doing, creating these knowledge bases. So we're giving that consistent, good customer service right across the board to whoever it is. I mean, mine are very disparate, you know, from auction houses to people who fit window film to people who give business advice. But I can assure you that you will get that fantastic customer service, and that is backed up with this knowledge base that's created right at the beginning, and it's organic. So we really get to know that customer. So we're about raising the bar. So we may be a little bit different. I'm a little bit more involved with my clients than maybe some of the outsourcing in, say, India or South Africa or anywhere else that is very popular for big companies to go to. So mine's a bit of a different operation, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask you, Karen, is what you do of having that upfront effort and that organic knowledge base is not the default of the industry, is it?
Oh, no, not at all. No.
And I think that's what the difference is, yeah.
And thanks, Karen. And nice little plug for the business. It all sounds great, by the way. Well done.
It is.
Oliver, I want to come to you because I know, having spent time with you and your team in some of the Call Northwest Awards, and hearing how you guys approach customer experience and customer service, I can imagine some of the stuff that Gus has said might be at odds to some of the ethos that sits within you and your team. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on some of the stuff that's been said and how you kind of make that customer experience maybe work for you guys on a slightly more smaller budget.
Yeah, it's a good point, Gary. And I think we're in the world of water and water billing, which typically customers aren't going to get out of bed in the morning and punch the air and look forward to speaking to us. So we're tasked with how do we make that experience memorable. So kind of touching on your point really, Gary, in terms of the exceeding customer expectations, we only speak to perhaps, I don't know, maybe 10% of our customers every year. So, we only have limited interaction. So we need to make sure we're maximizing those that we do and leaving a positive impression with them. And so, I would agree that I think sometimes we can be too focused on exceeding expectations and perhaps lose sight of the basics a little bit. We try and stretch ourselves. And whilst I think it is important to try and raise the bar on what we're doing with customers, we've got to get the basics right as well. It's all very well and good to have a fantastic interaction on the phone with the customer. But if we're sending terrible emails out, for example, we haven't got the foundation really to build on. So I think that would be, in terms of the exceeding customer expectations bit. And then the other point, I think probably linked to your question, Gary, actually, which was the piece around, we've talked about where, there is a risk of over-investing and where we can lose out. My question was going to be around, if we're going to invest in one thing, Gus, what would that one thing be? Is it people? Which from my head, I think we're a people business that serve customers. So, that's where I would probably go to first. Or would you suggest
a
other
really
things?
interesting point. I'd be keen to hear other people's views on that at the same time. But Gus, if there's one thing that we're going to invest in, what is it?
I'd say processes. I think it is a key thing, because people is what people end up thinking automatically, right? So we have a huge problem, so let's throw more heads to it. And a lot of the time, you're just having a plaster, but the reality is all those people are having incredibly inefficient processes. So if you think of how your processes work and then rationalize all around that, I think it's probably the best investment you can make. And it could mean that you need more people. It could mean you need other skill set or technology, but think really at what is your journey design, what is your processes, and think backwards.
And I saw Tracy Finley vigorously shaking her head when you were mentioning around people there. So I'm going to ask you to take yourself off mute, and I want you to talk about two points that you've made in the chat, Tracy, is around what Gus has just said there around people, and investing in people isn't necessarily hiring more people. And then the point that you made around reducing that friction in your back office process with CRM. So if we could talk about those two pieces, I'd be really interested in your views.
Yeah, one of my biggest kind of views in this discussion is that I wouldn't put shareholders first, because I think you make wrong decisions putting shareholders first. That's when you do that I do a lot of polls on LinkedIn. That's a big thing for me, and I get a lot of insights on polls. And I did one recently about why people leave a business, and that's because they feel undervalued. So for me, investing in people isn't hiring more people, it's creating an environment where they feel more valued. That's where I see the investments in developing and developing managers, especially. That's for me is investing in people. The note I made about CRM, you're saying where should you create friction? And I guess it's the use of the word friction really for me, is that I wouldn't necessarily, it's value add. So talking to somebody when they're spending £20,000 on a diamond ring, for me that's value add and probably not friction, because nobody would see that as friction. But for me, something like your ID&V, the more that businesses can work, I mean, we've all mentioned in the past times where we've been asked to do the ID&V in the IVR, and then you get through to an agent, you're going to have to do it again. So there are an awful lot of things that can be done with a CRM. So that's why I put, that's where the friction should be. It should be in the background as much as possible, and that's where I see investing in technology as a really good thing, because you save so much money. It's much better for the customers. It's much better for the agents as well.
Definitely. So I'm going to come back to Gustavo, because the point that you made there around shareholders, profits, customer expectation, I think that's a really interesting point. And I'm in Tracy's camp, because I think it can drive some of the some decisions around profits. But to your point, Gustavo, looking after profits isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I'm going to come back to you and say, explain more and expand as to why you think shareholders is the right place to focus.
Yeah, of course. And I would have been shocked if no one actually pushed back on that one. So thank you, Tracy. But The reality is, I firmly believe, and I always said, a customer experience is the best business strategy you can have to grow your business. Simple as that. It's the best strategy you can have, and you have to put them really top of mind when you actually go about your strategy. Now, what I'm saying is I'm kind of taking myself out of the equation of the world of customer experience and kind of taking a very much a bird's eye view approach, right? A company is an investment instrument, right? A company is a way of generating more value, of making your money work for you. Now, if the return rate you get per year from that company, from that organization, is lower than you get in a savings account, it's not very wise of you to invest in a company, right? As simple as that. Is the only way funds will keep coming to those organizations is if that's going to pay the owners, like the shareholders, as I said, back in proportions that are significant or that are worth the risk that goes with it. It may not be short-term return, but they need to see that that money is well invested. If that money isn't, they're going to take that to a different instrument rather than their company. And that's what I mean, is really, if we look at it from a very cold mathematical point of view, is unless the investment is in the right spot, it's giving the return that you want it to give return, it's not going to go far, and eventually the money will dry up. And that's why I say we need to put more focus on the shareholder. Now, I say it mostly because I want to be a bit provocative, and I do a bit of a reverse swing of the pendulum, because we're all about the customer, the customer, the customer. Then I'm like, wait a minute, money needs to come from somewhere first. And that's why I tend to be a bit more provocative or extreme in that view. But ultimately, it's an investment instrument first and foremost.
And I think Paul's made an interesting point. So I'm going to bring Paul into this topic, because this is we're not done on this point, I don't think. And Tracy's made another good point. Paul, the point that you make around leadership there, do you just want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it's quite refreshing to hear a CX sort of expert or person talking in what I class as quite a realistic way, which is, you know, these shiny things over here that everybody wants to build and lots of CX experts tell us we need, when actually you should really think about your processes. So I'm completely in alignment with that. However, I think there's got to be this balance, right? Because if you completely go after shareholder efficient, effective processes, you're undoubtedly going to lose some engagement around some of your people and your customers and potentially your product or service. So, and you know, we've not really talked about the quality of your product or service here too much either, which is clearly key. So I just think, you know, there's not going to be a right answer to that. So I just wanted to try and bring in that balance of, it's our job as leaders to try and help find that balance.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you on that. And I think for me, I think that the start point of a lot of this is, what's the experience that you want to deliver for your customers, and actually finding that start point is to say, right, this is the outcome. To Tracy's point, these are the outcomes that we want to deliver. This is what great customer experience looks like. And then if you exceed on that, brilliant. But actually meeting those, this is the absolute minimum that we want to be delivering. And then how do we start to go over and above? And there's a book that I read by Jim Collins. Most people know it's Good to Great. And his mantra is, the enemy of great is good. So when you talked earlier about that exceeding of expectations, in my mind, we want great expectations, not just good expectations. And how do we start to resource to that? Or how do we make sure that we are cost neutral on that great experience, but still delivering a great experience, which is interesting. I think there's a final question I wanted to ask Gus, because we're coming up to the hour, is what was the question I was going to ask? What advice would you give your younger self about achieving a great customer experience?
Okay, can I use the excuse of I'm still very young and therefore I don't have enough time to look back? Jokes aside, jokes aside.
And remember, I'm turning a milestone this week, so careful what you say.
Well, I know we only have 10 years difference, Gary. That's it.
Long time, 10 years, to be fair.
But I think, to be fair, Gary, the main thing, if I look back, right, and hindsight is a beautiful thing, the one thing that I really miss is operational experience. Like I've never been on the phones. I've never been in retail. So I've always been that strategic guy. I've always been strategic and corporate and so on, but I don't have the battle scars to prove I've been there and done my dues from that perspective. So it's the one thing I always reflect back to is I've never done that. And I've done a lot of listening and shadowing and so on, but I've never been the person on the phone or on the chat that tries to sort it out. And therefore, the advice I give myself is get that experience, take your time, take a year or two to really get into that aspect. And likewise, for people that are in a different field and have that operational background, take a year or two to really understand the strategic bit of it, understand how to read the finance, the balance sheet, understand the importance of the insights, why NPS isn't the right one necessarily. So really go outside of your zone of genius to get more of that empathy for others.
I love that phrase.
I don't know where I got it from, but you know that's only the third time I used it today, and I haven't used it for months.
So, I mean, you put a comment into the chat there, which I think is I would completely agree. And I think Tracy mentioned it prior, but the CX folks, chief balancing officers, I think that describes chief plate spinners is what we should be. And I think we've got that balancing act. And if Alex Mead was on today's call, he'd probably be saying something similar, is that actually the theory behind it is great, but actually you need to get immersed in the rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty with customer experience. So I think there is still time, Gus. You can get on the phone anytime. I'm sure any one of us can connect you up to somebody. Oliver probably has calls in queue that he could probably help strap a headset onto you for at the moment. But yeah, I think you've presented a very contentious view today, which is designed to be provocative, like you said. And I think it's been a smaller group, and I think we've had some good debate as a result of that, which is always great to see. It's been nice to have lots of people, but actually when you've got a small, intimate and perfectly formed group that have voices and opinions, you're going to get some good discussion. And I think aside from being a little bit smaller, it's been a really good meaty discussion today. So thank you for dropping those little CX bombs. We're going to finish off today's session. We've got 2 more sessions before the end of the year. The next session that we've got has got Caroline Wells and Alan Milne, who are joining us to discuss how we can create more strategic thought around how we fix complaints and first call resolution. So that's happening next month, and I think that's on, I'll just tell you the date that it's on. It's on the 29th of October, back to our normal slot of 1 till 2. And then I've got Mark Walton joining us in November, who's the CEO of Sensei, and he's going to be talking to us about how we can improve engagement in a hybrid world. So 2 great sessions to take us up to the run for Christmas. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks Gus for your provocative presentation, and thanks everybody for having some input and some discussion there. I think it's been really useful and really insightful session. So thanks very much, and I'll see you all again in a month's time. Take care, folks.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Take care all. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.